This daily drawing exercise is definitely a bit of a challenge, and it is something a little bit different. It's simple in some ways, but not simple in others. But the whole idea of these 10-minute drawing exercises is to have experiences and to experiment and to push ourselves and to get through things, and however things work, that's fine. So I thought this photo I took of, I think it was actually built by or for Maria Antoinette in the gardens of Versailles, and I think it's called the Temple of Venus. I thought was an interesting subject for a quick sketch. You notice me turn the paper, it's because I realised that the column I'd drawn was at an angle. So I just turned the paper so that it was now straight, and I could draw the rest of the drawing aligned with that column. So I draw the first of the two centre columns, and now I'm trying to see the rectangle that's between the two as a shape, and to create that shape by drawing the second column. I'm drawing through negative space. I'm actually trying to draw the space between the columns as much as I'm trying to draw the columns. Now, the interesting thing with this drawing is that eye level is pretty much at the base of the columns. So all of the height difference of the columns is at their top. And they actually change in height quite dramatically and become quite shorter when they're in further away positions. But while we make those columns shorter, we actually have to keep the column proportion the same, which means the columns have to become noticeably narrower in the same way they become noticeably shorter. And so that's important. The foreshortening, the visual compression of things moving further away, operates on the widths as much as on the heights. And so that's something I was particularly paying attention to. Because if we don't get a slight thinning of the columns, it's going to look like somehow there are shorter columns, or the columns are getting wider as they move further away. And I don't want that. Now, with a pen, drawing this way freehand, it's probably going to be a bit tricky to do the circular parts up the top. So at the moment, you can see what I'm doing. I'm trying to draw the lines and use them to help me of the bottom of the entablature, the circular entablature, and trying to use them to help me align where exactly the top of each capital, each Corinthian capital that's on top of each column, exactly where it needs to go. It is important to look to see where the four corners of the capitals are pointing for each column, because each column is angled out in a different direction relative to me when I was viewing this. So it's important for me to notice exactly how the corners align and visually what that means for the top of the capital. The two capitals on each side, the furthest most point on each side, we actually see side on. But we don't see that in any of the other capitals. The two center ones are angled slightly in each direction. So I'm looking at all these things as I'm drawing, because it changes what I draw. And when I drew the other columns, I was again drawing the space between the columns, and I was trying to visualize what's between them. So the columns that we see between them. So here I am with the columns on the right hand side and trying to get that curve correct. I know it's not going to be the cleanest line work I've ever drawn in one of these with all of these curves, so I do want it to be accurate. If you like, silhouette effect edge is looking right, then a bit of clutter in the lines within that isn't always very obvious, and particularly because these columns have a fairly busy capital, there are quite a few lines that can draw the eye. At this point now, I'm trying to draw all of the other side of this circular entablature, and and some hint of various carvings that we have on the inside. I want to get that done because then I can draw the other columns on the far side. And this is why I haven't drawn the columns yet, although with other architectural detail, I probably would have drawn the detail between the columns sooner. I just wasn't exactly sure exactly how high the columns were to come, and I wanted them to meet the entablature at the right point. So here I am now trying just to add a little bit of information about what the inside of this looks like and the values that we have. It's not the sort of detail I can afford to do too much of in a 10-minute drawing. You're still watching this in real-time drawing. And look, if you're finding this interesting, why not hit the like button for me? If you've got friends who draw, why not share this or one of the other 10-minute real-time drawing videos with them and suggest that it might be a helpful way for them to do a few weeks of drawing exercises. And so here I am working out this statue. Now I'm trying not to see the figure. I'm trying not to see it as a figure. I'm trying to see it as a collection of various shapes with perhaps various shadows or values that in one case we can see through an elbow. And I simply want to draw those positioned the way they're positioned in this. I'm not thinking figure. I'm not trying to draw Venus. I'm trying to visually copy the shapes, the edges, and there is dark value behind this, the darkened areas of the willow tree that's behind. So I'm wanting to have a shape that I can outline through that contrasting value behind. And I add the figure at this stage, and then I actually add another figure because the figure I added, well, it was a bit wide in the top, so I put another figure in there as well. We need to be flexible sometimes. And I particularly find that if a figure looks a bit awkward in some way, often drawing another figure overlapping the awkward part and then making sure that their clothing is dark and producing the darkness through hatching can cover up a multitude of problems with the original figure. It's a great little saving trick to use. So here I am trying to keep the proportions of this column the same. It's a lot thinner than its brothers that are closer. So it's keeping the proportions the same, the ratio of the height to width the same, regardless of the height or regardless of the width for that matter. That's what we need to do. So now I'm going up on the entablature. So look, I ended up going slightly too wide. I probably went 1 millimeter too wide on every gap between the columns and maybe on some of the columns. And that took me to, I don't know, probably 6-7 millimeters too wide across the whole thing. So it is a little more squat than the proportions. The overall temple I'm talking about, the overall width to height of the round part of the temple. To me, it looks just a fraction too wide. I must admit, I haven't measured it against the original, actually literally measured it and seen how it goes. But I think visually at this point, it looks a bit squat. When the dome part's put on, which it will be in a moment, that does improve it a bit because these things all affect the way something looks, can create optical illusions. So let's see what you think. I mess up that right side a bit. Being right-handed, the right-hand side of curves is always a bit of a challenge to me, and I used to just turn the paper so that it wasn't a challenge at all, and now I can't do that because it messes up the filming. Never mind. You can see me delaying and then, no, it's not round enough. And that's what I find happens. That's what I do on the right-hand side of curves on dome structures, I don't push out into the fullness of the curve enough. And I end up with, therefore, a lopsided effect, because my left-hand side is usually nice and fully round because I can do that comfortably, but not the right side. Now, this is my 10 minutes up. So now we're in double time. And in this time, I'm really doing the base in a few quick lines to try and represent the steps leading up to it. And I was just a bit too quick and they're not quite straight. But most of this time now is spent quickly doing the large willow tree that's behind this, the pine tree on the left, and the different type of tree on the right-hand side. So some fast hatching. I'm using a 0.1mm pen. I thought anything thicker was going to be too thick to try and get the effect of this. This is where it's really important that we make sure that we put that value in the space between two different columns and not in the two lines outlining a column. I've done that sort of thing before, and at this stage of a drawing, it's particularly annoying. And while it's not always so obvious in a more complex scene, in something relatively simple, it's a bit hard to hide. It's the equivalent of joining the gaps between the windows rather than drawing the windows when we've done all the vertical lines first and then we move to do the horizontal ones. So this is pretty quick. These loose downward, slightly curving lines that I'm using are meant in some very rough and gestural way to represent the way that the willow branches hang and the way the leaves hang and the sort of curving, swaying, loose effect that we get. Personally, I don't find willow trees the easiest tree to draw, but I do actually have a good photo of a willow tree that I am planning to use for a how to draw willow tree video. So if you'd be interested in that, please let me know in the comments and I'll try and speed that one up. And we're getting close to being done now, but we still have a couple more trees at the back to do. So here's this pine. I think this is the great sort of detail to include because it's nice and dark and it sits against the edge of the top of the entablature and the base of the dome. And you can see that I actually exaggerated a little just so I get a little more darkness. And that's pretty much it. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. What do you think? It's a bit of a challenge because sometimes simpler forms are more difficult to draw because there's nowhere to hide anything that's not quite right. But hey, it was different. It's a lot of fun. You'll find this photo on my channel community page. So why not have a go drawing it yourself? But look, whatever you draw, however you draw it, however it turns out, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next video. Bye.